So I chose Herbert Welsh's article because I thought it supported a really interesting idea that a lot of that I hadn't really been exposed to, which was the idea of corruption that goes on within politics. A lot of it really starts at a local government level, and he was kind of arguing that there's so much corruption within these major cities where a lot of uh, power holders within political government are actually coming from big businesses. And so that there's just kind of this ongoing cycle where those who already have power and wealth are just redistributing it back to their group. So there's kind of all this power and wealth that's accumulating through the Gilded Age is just going back to the people who already have it. And that's why there's a lot of lower class people who aren't necessarily receiving the aid. And he was arguing essentially that we need to stop the corruption that's going on at the local government level, and that will in turn cause the corruption at a national level to eventually die down. And he was kind of stating that a lot of us tend to focus on what's going on in DC, that is the main hub for which there is corruption within finance and social issues and political issues. But actually, he's stating that it's at the state level, it's at the local level. And that's where people were fighting at. That's where his reform movement was fighting at. And it introduced me to all these reformers who were actually fighting this idea. And so essentially his article is discussing the work that had been done at the Convention for, or Council for Good City Government, and where they were specifically talking about how do we create a platform so that governments in cities actually are electing politicians that are for the people rather than for the party. So that was something that I thought was interesting, and I really wanted to express that because I saw a lot of parallels between the issues that he was discussing within the government during the Gilded Age to today's government, which is also kind of what I base my educational activity on, because I think that the best way to actually teach this is kind of comparing it to today and noticing that there are similarities between the two, and that there's a lot of the issues that are going on today were present back then, and they really haven't changed. There is just new people in those positions, but this was an idea, this was a solution to it that none of us have really considered today. I don't really hear much about it. So it's worth just looking at. It's worth looking at what a lot of reformers were doing back then and seeing if that's still applicable to today. So what I decided to do in my speech when I was reenacting it was, originally this was an article, so I wanted to kind of emphasize his words rather than just talking about, and in a way where it was supposed to like rally up people and it's supposed to kind of be like a movement speech. I thought it was more about a speech that was kind of stating what the issue was, stating the work that was done at the Council for Good City Government, and then stating like, how do we solve this? So that's what I wanted to kind of reflect within my piece. It was more about like pointing at the issues within the government, pointing at the issues with the big politicians, stating their flaws, stating why they're not good politicians for the people, and that how they're kind of just working for the party. So that's kind of what I wanted to express within my speech. It was originally 7 pages long, and I chose to read about just a little bit over a page. That was probably the most difficult part of it because there was so much that he talked about, which I really wanted to talk about. He talked about the presence of women in the government and at the city council, and that's something that I was really wanted to discuss, but I didn't have enough time allotted for it. And for the theme that my group chose, which is the idea of political corruption, I knew that it wasn't as necessary as the stuff that I'd mentioned within my video. So they were three main takeaways that he stated within his article. So those three tried to come across. Also, I mainly wanted to talk about how the local governments are affecting the national governments, which is kind of why I chose a lot about like big business people and how there's like this ongoing cycle between the two and kind of the work that it's happening in all cities across America. So that was kind of what I tried to do within my speech. I tried to put emphasis on certain words. I tried to be kind of acting as if I was speaking in front of a room of people who are informed somewhat on the topic. This wasn't really necessarily for people who wanted, for people who hadn't really been exposed to this idea. It seemed to me that this was a speech that was meant to be given to like academics, people who had already been involved in this, kind of trying to gain support. It was an article that was published in a newspaper, but it was reflecting what had been done at the city council. So a lot of the words he was using was words that were produced from the city council. So that's why I was like, okay, this is more directed towards people who are informative on the topic, less to people who are actually being affected, which is like the lower class people.